The teacher let out a mocking chuckle when a young black girl shyly claimed that her father was Chuck Norris, but before anyone could laugh louder, the door swung open and in walked the man himself. Stay with us to find out what happened next. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more gripping stories. Olivia had only been at Meadowbrook Elementary for a few weeks, ever since her family relocated to a quiet suburb in Ohio. Back in Atlanta, people knew who she was, especially because of who her father was. But here in this small tree-lined town, where no one looked up from their phones long enough to dream big, she was just the new black girl in the back row, thrown with braids strung with colorful beads, and today a bright red t-shirt with a bold image of Chuck Norris mid-round kick across the front. That morning, Mrs. Porter had asked the class to present about their parents' careers for career day one by one. The students stood and shared. My dad's an accountant, my mum's a dental hygienist. My dad runs the hardware store down the road. Then came Olivia's turn, with a confident step forward and a spark of pride in her eyes. Olivia stood up, hugging her manila folder to her chest. Her voice rang out clear and excited. My dad is an actor, she said, beaming. And not just any actor, his name is Chuck Norris. In the room shifted. There was a pause, a beat, then a ripple, first in the form of side glances, then soft murmurs. Parents in the back exchanged puzzled looks. A few kids leaned toward each other, whispering and smirking. Someone let out a short, doubtful laugh that was quickly stifled. The energy in the room had changed. But Olivia didn't seem to notice. At first she was too caught up in the pride of the moment. He's filming a new movie in Hollywood right now. She continued, opening her folder, and I brought pictures from the set. This one is from last month. He sent it to me when he was working with their stunt team. But just as she reached to show the photo, Mrs. Porter interrupted with a raised palm and a smile that teetered between disbelief and forced patience. Olivia, she said slowly, this isn't the time for stories. We're sharing real careers today. Olivia insisted, her smile faltering but her voice still trying to be strong. He's my dad. Mrs. Porter sighed, her tone shifting to something colder. I know Chuck Norris is your hero, and he's a wonderful man, told Maya truly, but come now, Olivia. Let's not confuse admiration with reality. He's a famous white actor, you're not, and you don't even share a last name. The whispers in the room surged louder, as if her words gave permission to mock laughter bubbled in little bursts across the room. Someone from the middle row muttered, maybe she doesn't even know who her real dad is. Another kid added with a snort, probably some junkie or thief, and that's why she's making stuff up. You know, black people, they always lie. Olivia's face flushed crimson. Olivia spun around, her eyes filling with tears. That's not true, she shouted. Chuck Norris is my dad. He is, I'm not. Lying. Her classmates only laughed harder. The sound, cruel and cutting. Then where is he, her own of them, sneered out, kicking bad guys or avoiding child support. I'm telling the truth. Olivia screamed, her voice cracking as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. He's really my dad. Why does anyone believe me? Mrs. Porter's face turned stern, her voice snapping through the air. Enough, Olivia, that's enough. Sit down this instant. This behavior is unacceptable. The room went dead silent again, but not the kind that brought peace. Olivia stood in the middle of it all, her fists clenched, her heart pounding in her chest, tears streaking down her face, and in that moment surrounded by disbelief, mockery, and the sharp sting of humiliation. She had never felt more alone as Olivia made her way back to her seat. Her cheeks burned with shame, her heart pounding beneath the weight of every sidey glance and whispered snicker. The classroom felt colder somehow, like the walls themselves had turned their backs on her. No one, not even Olivia, knew that just a few weeks earlier the principal had quietly arranged for a surprise guest to speak at Career Day. That guest, by a strange twist of fate, had chosen today to make an appearance. Back to Olivia, who sat hunched at her desk, clutching her folder like a life preserver, utterly unaware that her entire day was about to take a wild turn. Just as Mrs. Porter called out the name of the next student, the door swung open, With a soft creak standing in the doorway was a rugged man, tall and commanding, with a crisp button-down shirt, well-worn jeans, and an unmistakable presence that seemed to shift the air itself. His beard was neatly trimmed, his boots echoed with quiet confidence, and slung casually over his shoulder was a leather duffel bag. Behind him, the principal entered, beaming with barely contained excitement. "Sorry to interrupt, Mrs. Porter," the principal said, his tone polite but firm. "Our special guest for Career Day arrived, eh? Bit earlier than expected, everyone. I'd like you to meet Mr. Chuck Norris, martial artist, actor, Air Force veteran, and motivational speaker." The classroom fell into stunned silence, not a breath, not a whisper, just wide eyes and dropped jaws. Mrs. Porter's complexion drained of color, her expression contorted into something between disbelief and dread. Her gaze shot from Chuck Norris to Olivia and back again, the truth slowly dawning on her like a storm rolling over the horizon. And as for Olivia across the room, her lips curled into the slow, sure smile as soon as their eyes met. Chuck could tell something wasn't right. He recognized that look on Olivia's face. Part relief, part fire, the kind that only showed up when someone she trusted had been made to feel small. Instead of pressing her with questions, he offered a calm nod, then turned to face the classroom with an easy smile that held quiet weight. "Hey there," he said, his voice smooth but steady, cutting clean through the tension like a roundhouse kick through drywall. "Name's Chuck Norris. I flew in from Hollywood late last night to make it here. Would have kicked down the plane door if I had to. I wasn't about to miss Career Day with my daughter." Gasps rippled through the room. A few kids literally stood up. "No way," someone whispered. "Is that really Chuck Norris?" Phones were whipped out, mouths hung open. Even the walls seemed to lean in closer, and in the middle of the shockwave stood Mrs. Porter, frozen like someone had pulled the plug from her spine. Chuck glanced back at Olivia. Her cheeks were red, but her eyes now burned with something stronger, pride. He stepped forward, slowly dropped his duffel on the table with a satisfying thud. "Before I dive into movie stunts and martial arts stories, how about some questions? Anyone want to know what it's like fighting Bruce Lee or drop-kicking through a window?" Hands shot up like popcorn. Chuck was about to pick one when a voice cut through the chaos, sharp, careless. "Hey, Mr. Norris," a boy in the third row called out. "If you're her dad, how come she's, black? You adopt her or find her in a dumpster or something?" The room went ice cold. Olivia froze. Zoe stiffened in her seat. Even the teachers looked stunned, eyes flicking between the boy and Chuck. Chuck slowly turned to the student, his expression unchanged, but the air around him seemed to tighten like a coiled spring. He walked toward the boy, not fast but firm, every step echoing like a countdown. Then he stopped, just a few feet away, looked him dead in the eye and said low and clear, "Son, I've broken bricks, bones, and records, but you're about one sentence away from learning what it feels like when I break silence." The boy blinked, color draining from his face. Chuck let that hang in there, then added, "Now listen close, 'cause I'm only saying this once. No, I'm not Olivia's biological father. Her real dad was a firefighter. A damn good one. My best friend, he died running back into a burning building to save 2 kids trapped upstairs. He didn't come out." The room was dead silent. Chuck's voice softened just slightly, but it carried more weight than ever before. "He passed. He asked me to look out for Olivia, and he promised I would. I raised her. I taught her how to throw a punch, fix an engine, tell the truth, and never ever let someone else tell her who she is." He looked back at the boy, his voice cool, but edged with something sharper, and just, "So we're clear. I heard you earlier. The stuff you said under your breath about black folks, about Olivia. That stops today." The boy squirmed in his seat. Chuck took one step back, gaze still steady. "You've got a choice to make. You can grow up, get smart, and treat people like they matter, or keep running your mouth until the world shows you how small it really is." Then he turned to the rest of the class, his voice lifting with new energy. "You want to know what makes a hero? It's not just someone who breaks boards or wins belts. It's someone who shows up, who stands for something, who protects people even when... It's hard, he gestured toward Olivia. She's more my daughter than blood could ever prove, and bit earlier than expected. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Mr. Chuck Norris, martial artist, actor, Air Force veteran and motivational speaker. The classroom fell into stunned silence, not a breath, not a whisper, just wide eyes and dropped jaws. Mrs. Porter's complexion drained of color, her expression contorted into something between disbelief and dread. Her gaze shot from Chuck Norris to Olivia and back again, the truth slowly dawning on her like a storm rolling over the horizon. And as for Olivia across the room, her lips curled into the slow, sure smile as soon as their eyes met. Chuck could tell something wasn't right. He recognized that look on Olivia's face, part relief, part fire. The kind that only showed up when someone she trusted had been made to feel small instead of pressing her with questions. He offered a calm nod, then turned to face the classroom with an easy smile that held quiet weight. "Hey there," he said, his voice smooth but steady, cutting clean through the tension like a roundhouse kick through drywall. "Name's Chuck Norris. I flew in from Hollywood late last night to make it here. Would have kicked down the plane door if I had to. I wasn't about to miss career day with my daughter." Gasps rippled through the room. A few kids literally stood up. "No way." Someone whispered, "Is that really Chuck Norris?" Phones were whipped out, mouths hung open. Even the walls seemed to lean in closer, and in the middle of the shockwave stood Mrs. Porter, frozen like someone had pulled the plug from her spine. Chuck glanced back at Olivia. Her cheeks were red, but her eyes now burned with something stronger, pride. He stepped forward, slowly dropped his duffel on the table with a satisfying thud. "Before I dive into movie stunts and martial arts stories, how about some questions? Anyone want to know what it's like fighting Bruce Lee or drop-kicking through a window?" Hands shot up like popcorn. Chuck was about to pick one when a voice cut through the chaos, sharp, careless. "Hey, Mr. Norris," a boy in the third row called out. "If you're her dad, how come she's, black? You adopt her or find her in a dumpster or something?" The room went ice cold. Olivia froze. Zoe stiffened in her seat. Even the teachers looked stunned, eyes flicking between the boy and Chuck. Chuck slowly turned to the student, his expression unchanged, but the air around him seemed to tighten like a coiled spring. He walked toward the boy, not fast but firm, every step echoing like a countdown. Then he stopped, just a few feet away, looked him dead in the eye and said low and clear, "Son, I've broken bricks, bones and records, but you're about one sentence away from learning what it feels like when I break silence." The boy blinked, color draining from his face. Chuck let that hang in there, then added, "Now listen close, 'cause I'm only saying this once. No, I'm not Olivia's biological father. Her real dad was a firefighter, a damn good one. My best friend, he died running back into a burning building to save 2 kids trapped upstairs. He didn't come out." The room was dead silent. Chuck's voice softened just slightly, but it carried more weight than ever before. "He passed. He asked me to look out for Olivia, and he promised I would. I raised her. I taught her how to throw a punch, fix an engine, tell the truth, and never ever let someone else tell her who she is." He looked back at the boy, his voice cool, but edged with something sharper and just. "So we're clear. I heard you earlier. The stuff you said under your breath about black folks, about Olivia. That stops today." The boy squirmed in his seat. Chuck took one step back, gaze still steady. "You've got a choice to make. You can grow up, get smart and treat people like they matter, or keep running your mouth until the world shows you how small it really is." Then he turned to the rest of the class, his voice lifting with new energy. "You want to know what makes a hero? It's not just someone who breaks boards or wins belts. It's someone who shows up, who stands for something, who protects people even when it's hard." He gestured toward Olivia. "She's more my daughter than blood could ever prove, and if any of you had half the grit she's got, you'd understand what real strength looks like." No one spoke. Even Mrs. Porter looked like she wanted to disappear. Chuck straightened up, offered a grin that still had steel in it now. Then, who's ready to learn how to kick like a Norris, and just like that? The air shifted, respect returned to the room, not out of fear but awe, the kind earned only through truth, courage, and a voice that knew when to stay calm and when to strike. "Before I get started," he said, voice calm but coiled with energy, "anyone got questions about martial arts action movies or what it was like working with Bruce Lee?" The class nearly exploded, hands shot into the air, kids whispering frantically to each other. A boy in the front row leaned toward his friend whispering, "I watched Walker, Texas Ranger with my dad last night." Mrs. Porter cleared her throat awkwardly, trying to regain some control. "What a surprise, Mr. Norris," she said, clearly rattled. "We didn't realize Olivia was just telling us about you for career day." Her words stumbled out, barely hanging together. Chuck nodded slowly. "The pieces coming together." "Is that so?" he said calmly but razor-sharp. "And what exactly did you say?" Mrs. Porter froze, eyes darting nervously, his presence now anchoring every gaze in the room. "Anyone want to share what they heard?" A boy raised his hand hesitantly. Teacher said Olivia was making it up," he muttered. "Said that no way her dad could be Chuck Norris." Silence fell again, thick, awkward, cold. Chuck didn't blink. He simply opened his bag and started pulling out memorabilia, film set photos, an old Air Force jacket, a faded martial arts belt, and a DVD box set with his face stamped in the front. "Well," he said, laying them out, "I guess it's time for a little double feature, action and education. Principal Wilson," he added, glancing toward the door. "If it's all right, I'd like Olivia to help me out today." The principal, now fully caught up in themament, nodded quickly, throwing a sharp, unmistakable look toward Mrs. Porter. Olivia stood still, a little shaky, but something in her posture had shifted. The kids around her were no longer giggling or whispering. They were in awe. She walked to her dad's side, her chin just a little higher. Two students near the back tried to whisper something, and without turning, Chuck said, "Gentlemen, whispering in class is like whispering on a movie set. One wrong word and the whole scene falls apart. If you've got something to say, speak up or zip it." The boys shut their mouths, instantly faces flushed. Chuck fired up a presentation on the screen, clips of him sparring with Bruce Lee, performing stunt scenes from iconic films and images from his real-life service in the Air Force. "This here," he said, pointing to a grainy photo, "was taken during my time stationed in South Korea, before the movies, before the fame. I was just a kid learning how to fight and how to serve." He glanced around. "See, people don't get to tell you what's too big for your life. They don't decide who you are or what you're capable of. That's on you. My daughter knows that, even when she's the only one in the room who does for the next 20 minutes. Father and daughter delivered a tag team presentation that blended action stories, martial arts, physics, and lessons about grit and integrity. Laughter returned to the room, so died respect at the end. Chuck turned toward Mrs. Porter. "Ma'am," he said, "I assume you believe in teaching kids to verify information before jumping to conclusions." She nodded, stiff and pale. "Good," Chuck replied, "because skepticism is healthy. But we also know there is a difference between asking questions and assuming someone doesn't belong. One leads to knowledge, the other." He looked directly at her. "That leads nowhere. Jumping to conclusions without facts is one thing. Acting on them without reflection, that's a whole different kind of mistake." Principal Wilson cleared his throat, clearly not amused. "Mrs. Porter," he said, his voice as crisp as a winter wind, "I think we'll need to have a thorough conversation after class. A private meeting would be best." Then turning to Chuck and Olivia, he added, "Thank you both. I believe everyone here learned something invaluable today, and I'm not just talking about martial arts for self-discipline. Some lessons go far deeper than any textbook." The bell rang, but no one moved. The students remained rooted to their seats as if reality hadn't quite caught up. Yet Chuck began to pack his things when a girl near the back, wearing a pink hoodie and two messy buns, raised her hand. "Mr. Norris?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "I want to learn karate too, but my uncle says girls like me aren't built for it." Chuck walked over and crouched down beside her desk, his voice low and firm. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Zoe." "Well, Zoe," he said with a calm, steady grin, "your uncle's probably right about one thing. It is tough, but toughness doesn't scare us, right?" He paused, looking her in the eye. "People like us were made for." Tough Chuck stepped forward, his presence commanding instant attention. The gym hushed, kids leaned in. Even the teachers stood straighter. "I've fought in tournaments, worked in the military, starred in more action movies than I can remember." Chuck began, voice steady, "But let me tell you something I've learned the hard way. It takes more courage to be yourself than to throw a punch." He let that hang in the air for a beat, then continued, eyes sweeping across the room, locking onto the girls in the crowd. "Some people will try to tell you that, because you're a girl, you need to act a certain way. Be quiet, be polite, stay in the kitchen. Smile pretty, serves your husband like he's the center of your life." He paused, his voice turning hard as iron. "Well, I've got news for anyone who still thinks like that. The strongest people I've ever met were women, soldiers, fighters, moms working 3 jobs, daughters standing up when everyone else backed down. Women don't belong in the kitchen. They belong wherever they choose to be, in a dojo, on a film set, in Congress, running a company, or just being free to chase what matters to them." He looked over at Olivia and smiled. "You don't have to choose between being strong and being kind, or between being smart and being respected. You're allowed to be all of it. Don't let anyone hand you a box and say, 'This is your place.' If you can throw a roundhouse kick, you can build a rocket. If you can raise your voice, you can lead a movement. Never let the world shrink your dreams to fit their comfort zone." A few parents blinked back tears. A boy in the back clapped, then another, and soon the entire gym broke into applause, the kind that echoes in bones and sticks to memory. Zoe turned to Olivia, whispered, "That was the coolest thing I've ever heard." Olivia grinned. She didn't just feel seen, she felt heard. Then turning back to the class, he added, "Olivia and I are starting a self-defense club right here at Meadowbrook. Everyone's welcome." Zoe's face lit up like a summer sunrise as the students slowly gathered their things. Mrs. Porter stood frozen, her face drained of all color, as if reality had finally slapped her across the face, standing beside her father. Olivia felt a swirl of emotions: relief, validation, lingering hurt, but also something unfamiliar and empowering, like she'd just stepped into her own strength. When the classroom finally cleared, Chuck turned to Olivia. "I'm proud of you," he said, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You told the truth when it would have been easier to just sit down and stay quiet." Olivia hugged him tightly. "But how did you know what happened?" she asked. Chuck gave her a knowing smile. "Because I've been in your boots, Liv, more times than I care to count." His voice carried the gravity of battles long fought on screen and off, and I know that look, the one you get when the world tells you you're not enough. I see it in the mirror every time someone tries to box me in. What neither of them knew was that this moment was just the beginning. Meadowbrook was about to learn a hard truth. Underestimating a Norris wasn't just a mistake. It was the kind of miscalculation that left lasting impact in the days that followed. Chuck's visit stirred up every hallway in the school. Whispers flew, lines were drawn, some parents defended Mrs. Porter, calling it a misunderstanding, while others were outraged at how Olivia had been treated at the center of it all. Olivia kept moving forward, even when the murmurs followed her like shadows. But her story didn't end with a moment of redemption. Was only the beginning. Later that evening, while the sun dipped low over the quiet streets of Meadowbrook, Olivia sat beside her father on their front porch, legs swinging over the edge of the wooden steps. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "there's this martial arts tournament at the end of March. I want to compete." Chuck glanced down at her, his signature calm smile spreading across his weathered face. "You serious about it?" She nodded. "I want to try, really try." He gave her a long look, then said, "All right, let's do it, but you're going to train like a warrior." What Olivia didn't expect was Zoe, the very girl who used to roll her eyes at her shirts, to approach her the next day and say, "I heard you're signing up for the March tournament. I've always wanted to try the team sparring division. I need a partner." Olivia hesitated, then nodded slowly, and just like that, the unlikely pair signed up together. From that point on, Chuck trained them every afternoon. The old barn behind their house became their dojo floor, covered in thick mats, punching bags swaying in the corners, and Chuck's voice echoing through the rafters with steady discipline. Day after day, the two girls showed up, bruised but determined, learning stances, strikes, breathing, and balance. Chuck never went easy on them, but his presence, firm, fair, unwavering, pushed them through the sweat and exhaustion as March rolled in with crisp winds and early blossoms. So did something else. Trust. The space between Olivia and Zoe slowly closed. Where there'd once been awkward silences now came shared laughter. On one particularly grueling afternoon, they both collapsed onto the mat, gasping for breath. Olivia looked over and groaned. "I think I left my legs somewhere around round 3. Zoe burst out laughing. "Tell your legs mine. Say hi." They left after the warm-up. They lay side by side, bruises blooming along their shins, their arms draped over their eyes, giggling like old friends. Chuck stood quietly in the doorway, arms folded, watching them with a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. The training was working, but something more important had taken root too. Not just strength, not just discipline, a bond, a friendship forged through grit, sore muscles, and shared dreams. And Chuck, the man who once silenced a classroom by simply walking in, now stood, smiling, not because they were winning fights, but because they were becoming something far greater. A team. The day of the tournament arrived with the buzz of adrenaline in the air and the sound of sneakers squeaking on polished gym floors. Rows of folding chairs lined the edges of the arena, filled with families and coaches shouting encouragement. Olivia and Zoe stood side by side in their matching uniforms, belts tied tight, their faces set with quiet focus. Chuck, despite wanting nothing more than to be right beside them, had to stay hidden in the crowd, disguised in a hoodie and ball cap, seated high up in the bleachers. His presence could have drawn too much attention, and this day wasn't about him. It was about them. The early rounds came. Fast and fierce, Olivia and Zoe moved like they were extensions of the same heartbeat, flipping, blocking, striking in sync. But during one match they came face to face with a pair of girls from a rival dojo. From the start, something was off. One of them sneered at Olivia. "Didn't know they let charity cases in," she said under her breath. The other laughed. "This ain't Barbie's house, honey. You better hope your little space dream shall help you float away when we're done with you." Olivia's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Chuck's words echoed in her mind. "Let your power speak louder than your anger," and so she did. They fought with everything they had, blow by blow. They pushed through, matching strength with strategy, grace with fire. When they landed the final synchronized strike that sent their opponents stumbling backward, the crowd burst into cheers. Olivia and Zoe bowed, chins high, then turned and walked off the mat with steady steps. They were going to the finals. The championship match began under the hot glare of the overhead lights, tension crackling in the air. Olivia's opponent was vicious, skilled, and clearly playing to win at all costs. Then it happened, a cheap, illegal low kick when the ref was distracted. A brutal snap echoed as Olivia collapsed with a scream, clutching her leg. Silence fell across the gym like a curtain. Zoe dropped to her knees beside her. "Olivia, your leg don't move." But Olivia's eyes were locked on her opponent. Her voice was barely a whisper, but full of fire. "I'm not going out like this." Slowly, painfully, Olivia pushed herself up, balancing on one leg, her injured foot barely touching the mat. The crowd began to stir. Whispers turned to murmurs. She took a breath, then another. In her mind, she could hear Chuck's voice, steady and sharp. "When you've got nothing left, give them the one move they'll never forget." And then it happened. With a fierce, primal yell, Olivia lunged forward, spinning on her good leg, lifting her body into the air, and snapping out with the very move Chuck had drilled into her bones since the first day. The roundhouse kick, fast, brutal, flawless. Her heel struck the side of her opponent's head with a crack that seemed to explode through the entire gym. The girl crumpled instantly. The crowd erupted like a bomb going off. Cheers, gasps, screams of disbelief. Coaches leapt to their feet, parents covered their mouths, the referee rushed in, threw up his arms and pointed, "Victory!" Zoe ran to her, catching Olivia just before she collapsed again. They fell into each other's arms, laughing through tears, overwhelmed with the noise, the pain, the glory, and only when the medics arrived did people realize Olivia's leg was broken still. She refused the wheelchair she wanted, to walk limping, leaning on Zoe. She made her way to the podium, there at the highest tier. The two girls stood together, metals draped around their necks, bruised and beaming. Olivia raised her gold medal high above her head, the lights catching it like fire. Then she looked up toward the bleachers there, half hidden in the shadows. Chuck stood, baseball cap pulled low, hoodie zipped to his chin, but he couldn't hide the smile. He clapped proud and loud, his eyes shining. Olivia met his gaze, lifted her metal again, and grinned. This time it wasn't just a victory, it was a legacy. That night, the house was dim and quiet save for the occasional hiss of the wind brushing against the windows in the living room. Olivia lay stretched out on the couch, her leg elevated on a stack of pillows, while Chuck crouched beside her with a roll of gauze and a tub of salve. Her tournament uniform had been traded for soft pajamas, but the stubborn pride in her eyes hadn't gone anywhere. "All right, this is going to sting," Chuck muttered gently, pressing the cloth against her bruised skin. "Ah, Dad," Olivia yelped, squirming. "You said sting, not burn through my soul." Chuck chuckled, under his breath, shaking his head. "You're lucky it's just your leg that's broken and not your mouth then." More quietly, with a fondness he didn't even try to hide, he added, "You little mule-headed maniac. What were you thinking going through with that fight like that?" Olivia grinned through the pain. "I learned from the best." He glanced up at her, brow raised flattery. "Won't stop me from grounding you. Worth a try," she said with a shrug, then laughed softly. Chuck sat back on his heels, studying her for a moment, the lines around his eyes deepening. Not from anger, but something closer to wonder. His voice dropped to a quiet rumble. "You know, you remind me so much of your dad, that same fire, that same don't you dare quit. Look in your eyes, he was the toughest guy I ever knew. But his heart..." Chuck looked away for a second, swallowing down emotion. "His heart was where all that strength came from, and I promise you he'd be proud of you, Liv. So damn proud." Olivia blinked, her smile fading into something softer, gentler. "You really think so?" "I know so," Chuck said, tapping her gently on the forehead. "You didn't just win a match out there today, you showed them who you are." The room settled into silence, warm and full. Olivia leaned back, her eyes beginning to drift, closed, exhaustion finally catching up to her. "Night, Dad," she mumbled. Chuck kissed her on the forehead. "Night, champ." Sometime later, when the house had gone still and Olivia's breaths had evened out into sleep, Chuck slipped out the back door. The night air was crisp, the grass cool beneath his feet. Stood alone in the yard, head tilted up to the sky. The stars were out in full pinpricks of silver scattered across the darkness, like messages only the heart could read. He folded his arms and exhaled slowly, then spoke low and sure, as if to someone standing right beside him. "You should have seen her, man," he said softly. "You would have been speechless, strong, brave, stubborn as hell, just like you. She's got your fire, but she's got something else too. She's got that kind of light that changes people." The wind rustled gently through the trees as if listening. Chuck's eyes stayed on the stars. "I hope you're watching. I hope you saw her shine today." He stood there for a while longer, not needing a reply, just the comfort of the stars above and the weight of a love that never really left. And inside, the house behind that quiet glow of porch light, Olivia slept, gold medal resting on the nightstand, and a world finally beginning to understand who she was becoming. Wow, what a journey, right? If you've made it this far, thank you. Because this story wasn't just about a little girl and a big-name action star. It was about truth, about belonging, about the fire that lives inside us, even when the world tries to put it out. Olivia's story is powerful because it shows us how easy it is to judge someone based on appearances, race, or assumptions, and how deeply wrong that can be the pain she felt in that classroom. That humiliation, it's something too many kids face every day. But what made the difference was someone who showed up for her, someone who believed in her even when no one else did. Chuck Norris. Yeah, the legend wasn't just a karate-chopping hero in this story. He was a father, a mentor, a man who knew that real strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how fiercely you protect the people you love. Chuck didn't raise his voice, but he spoke volumes. He stood up for Olivia when it counted most, and that's something we all can learn from this story. Reminded me that courage comes in many forms. Speaking up when it's hard, chasing dreams when you're told not to, and standing tall even when your leg is broken, literally, and that final moment under the stars, pure poetry. It got me, not going to lie. So now I want to hear from you. What part hit you the hardest? What did you take away from Olivia's journey? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. Let's keep this conversation going. And hey, if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and never let anyone tell you who you're allowed to be a racist. Pilot attacked Snoop Dogg in first class. But what happened next shocked everyone. Snoop Dogg reclined in his plush leather seat, the polished frames of his sunglasses resting effortlessly on the bridge of his nose as he scrolled through the tracks on his phone. The hum of the private jet, steady and soothing, accompanied his quiet anticipation. This was the getaway he'd been envisioning for months, a long overdue escape to the sun-kissed shores of the Maldives. Life had been a whirlwind lately, tangled in endless tours, studio sessions, and commitments that blurred into each other now. For once he was giving himself permission to breathe. The jet was a floating masterpiece of luxury. The buttery leather seats cradled him in comfort, while the soft glow of ambient lighting cast a warm, tranquil atmosphere across the cabin. A flight attendant approached with a practiced grace, presenting a crystal glass of freshly squeezed juice. "Here you go, Mr. Broadis," she said with a genuine smile, using his given name with a familiarity that didn't overstep. "If you need anything, just let us know." "Appreciate it, sweetheart." Snoop responded with his signature charm, raising the glass in a playful toast. "Y'all really went all out with this setup." He took a slow sip, the tart sweetness refreshing against the dry air of the cabin. The plane began its taxi down the runway, engines rumbling with restrained power. Snoop shifted slightly, glancing around the cabin. The other passengers seemed comfortably detached, business types and leisure travelers alike, wrapped up in their own worlds, and uninterested in the global icon sharing their flight. As the jet left the ground, he felt that familiar rush of ascent, a fleeting moment where gravity loosened its grip and the sky opened up beneath him. He pulled out his tablet and began sketching lyrics, fragments of rhythm and rhyme stirred by the low, steady drone of the engine's. Creativity came easily in moments like these, when the noise of everyday life was stripped away, leaving just the pulse of inspiration. Hours later, as the cabin lights dimmed to signal nighttime, Snoop reclined his seat and closed his eyes. The plane's gentle sway soon coaxed him into a light, dreamlike state somewhere over the endless stretch of the Atlantic. The intercom crackled softly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've officially left US airspace and are now cruising at 3500 FT. The skies ahead are clear, and we're on track for an on-time arrival in the Maldives just under 8 hours from now. Thank you for flying with us, and please don't hesitate to call on our crew if you need anything." The announcement was met with quiet murmur and a few sleepy glances toward the windows outside. The ocean sprawled endlessly below its surface, silvered by the moonlight. Snoop shifted in his seat, stretching his legs as he silently appreciated the captain's calm professionalism and the smoothness of the journey thus far. A few moments later, the cabin door to the cockpit opened, and the captain himself emerged. He was a tall man, probably in his late 40s, with neatly combed dark hair and a crisp uniform that seemed untouched by the long flight. His expression was friendly but distant, a practiced hospitality that came with the job. The captain moved down the aisle, pausing occasionally to exchange pleasantries with passengers. It seemed like a routine gesture, a personalized touch befitting a high-end flight. But when he reached Snoop's row, he stopped. His gaze lingered sharp and assessing, and a faint line etched itself into his forehead. Snoop slid his sunglasses down slightly and gave a polite nod. "Enjoying the flight, sir?" the captain asked. His tone was courteous, but there was an undertone, something measured, guarded. "Sure am," Snoop answered, leaning into his easy charisma. "You all run a tight ship, I respect it." The captain didn't move on his smile, flattened into a tight, cautious line. His eyes, once neutral, took on a cold glint. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Snoop felt the atmosphere shift like a breeze turning suddenly sharp. "Well," the captain said slowly, his voice lowering, "we like to make sure everyone here belongs." His eyes didn't waver. "May I ask who you are and why you're on this flight?" Snoop blinked the question, hit with the force of disbelief. He sat up straighter, pulling his sunglasses completely off. "I'm Snoop Dogg," he said, gesturing toward himself. His voice stayed calm, but his jaw tensed beneath the surface. "Booked this flight fair and square. Everything's in order, my man." The captain's stance shifted. He crossed his arms and gave a perfunctory nod. "I see," he said, voice clipped, "but you'll forgive me if I don't just take your word for it." The air around them thickened with unspoken tension. Nearby passengers, sensing the undercurrent, began to steal glances. Snoop held the captain's gaze, his usual laid-back demeanor now edged with quiet steel. He'd faced skeptics and critics before, but this hostility was different, sharper, more deliberate. "Look," Snoop said evenly, his tone calm but resolute. "You got the paperwork right. Go ahead and check it. Everything's legit. No need to blow this out of proportion." The captain didn't move. His eyes flicked around the cabin, seeking support that wasn't there. "We'll see about that," he muttered, turning abruptly and striding back toward the cockpit. Snoop exhaled a long breath, leaning into his seat. The encounter left a sour taste in his mouth, a faint but persistent warning in the back of his mind. Still, he forced himself to let it go. This was supposed to be a trip for unwinding, not another battle around him. The passengers returned to their quiet routines. Movies resumed, books reopened, conversations whispered. Snoop slid his sunglasses back on, shut his eyes, and tried to shake the encounter. But beneath the hum of the engines, a nagging voice whispered, "This isn't over." The cabin light stayed low, casting the plane in a dim, artificial twilight outside. Endless skies stretched across the horizon. Snoop tapped through his phone, letting familiar beats fill his ears. Music had always been his refuge. But then the intercom crackled. The captain's voice clipped and cold filled the cabin. "Mr. Bass, please remain seated. I'll be speaking with you shortly." Heads turned, conversations died. Snoop sat up, his pulse quickening as unease settled deeper in his chest. This wasn't protocol. This was something else. The cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out, his gait purposeful, his eyes locked on Snoop. Two flight attendants trailed him, their faces taut with discomfort. The man halted beside Snoop's seat, his lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "Mr. Broadus," he began, voice loud enough for the whole cabin to hear, "I have a few questions about your presence on this flight." Snoop's jaw tightened. "Man, I already told you I booked this flight. Legit. Call the charter company. Everything checks out." The captain's mouth twisted into a disdainful smile. "And I'm just supposed to believe that a guy like you, flying private?" His gaze swept over Snoop dismissively. "Let's be honest, you don't exactly fit the profile." The words hit like a slap. Snoop blinked, momentarily stunned by their audacity. The cabin turned electric with tension. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. "A guy like me?" Snoop repeated softly, disbelief threading his voice. "What's that supposed to mean?" You know exactly what it means, the captain said, leaning in. People like you don't belong here. I don't care how much money you've got. This is out of your league. Snoop's hands curled into fists. The accusation was familiar, but the boldness was staggering. Listen, he said, voice measured. I got the receipts, the paperwork, everything straight. I'm just here for a flight. That's it. The captain's eyes gleamed with something dark. Yeah. Well, I don't care about your paperwork. People like you, troublemakers, criminals, you think you can buy your way into places you don't belong. Not on my watch. The words hung heavy in the stale cabin air. Snoop inhaled, slowly trying to hold on to his composure. Around him, passengers sat frozen, eyes flicking between him and the captain. You don't know me, man, Snoop said finally, his voice low and steady. I'm minding my business, paying for my seat like everyone else. You're the one making this into something. It's not. The captain's face contorted into a sneer as he leaned closer. Close enough that Snoop could smell the stale coffee on his breath. I know enough. You're just a thug with money, and money doesn't buy. Respect. Silence wrapped around the cabin like a vice. A few passengers shifted uneasily. One of the flight attendants stepped forward. Voice small and nervous. Captain, she whispered. Maybe we should stay out of this. The captain barked, not sparing her. A glance. Snoop pushed himself to his feet, towering over the man. The cabin seemed to hold its breath, despite the overwhelming urge to react. Snoop held himself together. His voice was low but firm as he said, I'm done talking to you. If you got a problem, take it up with the people who booked this flight. I'm not here for your drama. But the captain wasn't finished. He jabbed a stiff finger into Snoop's chest, his voice rising with each word. You think you can intimidate me? You're just another thug who thinks he's above the rules. That was the breaking point. The captain's words unleashed a barrage of insults, each one sharper than the last. Gangster, drug dealer, trash. The words hit like punches, reverberating through the cabin, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Snoop stood his ground, his jaw locked, his fists trembling. At his sides, he refused to give the man the satisfaction of a reaction. Finally, the captain leaned back. His expression smug. I'll handle this my way, he said coldly, before turning on his heel and marching toward the cockpit. Snoop collapsed into his seat, his hands shaking with barely restrained rage around him. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances and whispered in hushed tones. The flight attendants hovered nearby, their eyes carefully avoiding his. Snoop turned to the window, staring blankly. At the endless stretch of clouds beyond the glass, he had boarded this plane to escape the relentless noise of his fame, hoping to find a moment of peace. Instead, he found himself trapped in a cruel, twisted replay of the very battles he'd spent years trying to leave behind. The plane cruised smoothly through the sky, but inside the atmosphere was thick with tension. The captain's venom still hung in the air, invisible, but heavy. Snoop's mind raced. How many others had endured this kind of treatment? Without the voice or platform to speak up, how many times had people like that captain gotten away with it, unchecked and unchallenged? Suddenly the intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making an unscheduled landing at the nearest airy strip. Due to a safety concern, the announcement sliced through the cabin's uneasy murmur, replacing confusion. With fear, passengers exchanged anxious looks. Snoop, however, understood immediately. This wasn't about safety. This was personal. The captain appeared, again striding down the aisle with rigid, calculated steps. His face was stone cold. His eyes locked on Snoop. You, he barked, jabbing a finger in Snoop's direction. Grab your stuff, you're getting off this plane. Snoop didn't move. His voice remained even, but his eyes burned with defiance. I'm not going anywhere. I paid for this flight just like everyone else here. The captain's lips twisted into a sneer. I said, get up now, or I'll make you. The cabin seemed to shrink under the weight of the threat. A few passengers shifted uneasily. Some looked like they wanted to speak up, but thought better of it. The captain radiated authority, and no one dared challenge him. When Snoop didn't budge, the captain lunged forward, gripping his arm and yanking him out of the seat. You're a danger to this flight, the captain spat, and I'm not taking any chances. The sudden violence caught Snoop off guard. Pain shot through his arm. As he staggered into the aisle, he steadied himself, his eyes locking onto the captain's face. "Danger," he said through clenched teeth. "The only danger here is you." The captain's response was swift and unforgiving. He shoved Snoop hard. Snoop stumbled and fell, his shoulders slamming into the metal edge of a seat. The cabin filled with sharp gasps, but Noon moved to help. Snoop saw the fear in their eyes. They were terrified of becoming the next target. "I'm not going to fight you," Snoop said, pushing himself up. His voice was calm, though his ribs throbbed from the fall. "But you're going to regret this." The captain's smirk deepened. "We'll see about that." The plane tilted slightly as it began its descent outside. Thick clouds swallowed the sky, and Thien Jeans hummed with mechanical indifference. Snoop stood, his gaze never wavering from the captain. He wouldn't give the man the satisfaction of seeing him broken when the plane finally touched down. The cabin door creaked open, revealing a wall of thick, humid air. It rushed inside, clinging to the skin like a warning. The jungle-like landscape beyond was unfamiliar, but Snoop knew one thing with certainty. The fight was far from over. The captain seized Snoop's belongings and hurled them onto the scorching tarmac without uttering a single word out. He barked, his voice sharp and unforgiving. Snoop stood at the threshold of the plane, eyes scanning the unfamiliar landscape beyond. Towering trees and thick foliage encircled the tiny airstrip, while the heavy, humid air clung to his skin like a suffocating blanket. He turned back toward the captain, his gaze steady. "You think this is it over?" Snoop asked in a low voice and measured. "It ain't." The captain's face twisted in disdain as he shoved Snoop roughly toward the exit. "Get out before I call the cops." With no other option, Snoop stepped onto the gravel-strewn tarmac. The plane's door slammed shut behind him with a metallic thud, and moments later the engines roared to life. He watched as the aircraft ascended, shrinking into the pale sky until it was nothing more than a distant speck left alone in the middle of nowhere. Snoop stood motionless, his heart pounding with disbelief. Humiliation burned in his chest, mingling with anger and an unsettling sense of vulnerability. Emotions he hadn't felt in years. The airstrip stretched out empty before him, save for a solitary shack leaning precariously to one side. Beyond it, the landscape was a sea of endless jungle, thick and impenetrable. Adjusting the strap of his bag on his shoulder, Snoop trudged toward the shack. Gravel crunched beneath his sneakers, each step amplifying his isolation. When he reached the structure, he found it abandoned. The door creaked and rusty hinges swaying slightly in the breeze. The truth of his predicament hit him with full force. He had been cast aside, left to fend for himself in a strange land. The oppressive heat bore down as he wandered for hours through. The tangled undergrowth sweat soaked his clothes and every muscle in his body ached from the earlier confrontation. On the plane, his mind drifted to his family, his fans, the life he'd painstakingly built. How had it come to this? Dusk settled over the jungle and the wilderness stirred to life around him. Insects hummed, branches crackled in the shadows, and distant animal calls echoed through the thick, stifling air. Snoop found a small clearing and slumped against a tree. His chest heaving with exhaustion, he gazed upward, searching for stars through the dense canopy. Despite the fear and the bone-deep fatigue, he refused to surrender to despair. Survival was his only focus now. He would find a way out of this nightmare. And when he did, the world would know what had happened. The captain would pay for what he had done. The jungle came alive as night deepened. Every whisper of movement, every unseen creature's cry set Snoop's nerves on edge. The relentless humidity clung to his skin, and his body throbbed with the dull ache of bruises and exhaustion. His phone was useless, showing only a blank screen with no signal, no map, no connection, no sense of direction, just endless green swallowing him whole still. He forced himself to move. Stumbling through the underbrush, he pushed forward, driven by sheer determination. After what felt like an eternity, a faint glow flickered in the distance. His pulse quickened light. Hope gritting his teeth against the searing pain in his legs. Snoop pressed on. The glow grew brighter as he neared a small cluster of wooden huts. The sound of drums mixed with laughter and animated voices filled the night air. He hesitated at the edge of the clearing, uncertainty gripping him. How would these strangers react to a disheveled man emerging from the wilderness? But he was out of options. Raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm, he stepped forward. The music stopped conversations, died mid-sentence. Dozens of eyes fixed on him. Silence hung heavy in the warm night. From the edge of the crowd, a young man gasped, his eyes wide with recognition. "You is that Snoop Dogg?" he whispered. The tension shattered instantly. The crowd stirred, voices rising in disbelief and excitement. Some lifted their phones to snap photos while others murmured in shock. A tall man with broad shoulders stepped forward, concern etched into his features. "You're Snoop Dogg," he said. His tone laced with disbelief. "Man, what are you doing here? You look like you've been through hell." Snoop let out a weary chuckle, lowering his hands. "Yeah, something like that." Snoop said, his voice low and strained. "Got thrown out of a plane by some racist pilot. Now I'm just trying to make it back home." The villagers exchanged bewildered glances, their initial shock quickly hardening into quiet indignation. The tension hung thick in the humid air, until the tall man standing at the front of the group stepped forward. He placed a firm, reassuring hand on Snoop's shoulder. "You're safe now, brother." And the man said, voice steady and warm, "We got you, come, let's get you cleaned up." Snoop followed him to a larger hut nestled near the village center. Inside, a group of women moved with calm, practiced precision. They cleaned the scrapes and bruises on his arms and face, murmuring gentle reassurances while offering water and simple food. He ate slowly, every movement weighed down by exhaustion. Each nod of gratitude was met with soft smiles and understanding eyes. As word spread, more villagers arrived. Curious and concerned, they brought small gifts, woven trinkets, fruit, even a hand-carved charm for protection. Snoop was overwhelmed by their kindness. He hadn't expected to feel this, seen safe after everything. It was a comfort that settled deep in his chest. The tall man returned, later, accompanied by a handful of others who carried themselves with quiet authority. He introduced himself as Jamal, and the group sat down with Snoop beneath the lantern-lit canopy. They listened without interruption as he recounted the nightmare that had started mid-flight, that pilots got to face the consequences. Jamal set his jaw tight. "But first, we're getting you back home. Don't worry about the details. We'll take care of it." And they did. Over the next few days, the villagers sprang into action. They contacted the nearest consulate, arranged transportation through winding jungle roads, and even pulled their limited resources to cover his flight back to the United States. On his final night there, they threw a farewell gathering in the village clearing. Music drifted through the trees, the rhythmic beat of drums, blending with laughter and conversation. Snoop, still sore but in better spirits, joined in. When the morning sun painted the sky in soft pinks and golds, he stood by the makeshift airy strip facing Jamal and the others who had come to see him off. "Y'all didn't have to go this far for me," Snoop said, voice thick with emotion. "I won't forget this, ever, thank you." Jamal gave him a crooked grin and clapped his shoulder. "Just remember, man, you've got family here now. Anytime you need us, we got you." The flight back to the States was uneventful, a stark contrast to the chaos that had dropped him into the jungle. As he gazed out the window at the endless stretch of clouds, Snoop felt something shift within him. Anger, yes, but also resolve. He wasn't going to let this slide. The world needed to hear the truth, and that pilot needed to be held accountable. By the time the wheels touched down, a plan had already begun to crystallize in his mind. The plane taxied toward the terminal, and the Los Angeles skyline appeared through the scratched glass. A familiar, sharp-edged silhouette that whispered of home relief flooded his veins. But it was paired with a steely determination. This was far from over. Snoop stepped off the plane, his body protesting each movement with a dull ache. A small crowd had gathered just beyond the security barriers. Word of his ordeal had spread across social media, and now fans held up handmade signs. "Welcome home." Snoop cameras clicked, faces lit up with excitement. He raised a hand in greeting, forcing a smile. "Good to be back," he muttered, mostly to himself near the terminal entrance. Kevin stood waiting. His manager's face was tight with worry, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets as soon as Snoop approached. Kevin pulled him into a brief, hard hug. "Man, you good?" Kevin asked, stepping back to scan him from head to toe. "We heard some wild. What happened out there?" Snoop exhaled a heavy breath, dragging a hand down his face. "Long story, Kev. Pilot was racist. A shell straight up threw me off the damn plane into nowhere. If it hadn't been for some real ones out there, I'd still be stuck." Kevin's eyes narrowed. "No, man, we're not letting that slide." Snoop gave a slow nod. "Yeah, I'm already working on it. That dude's going to pay for what he did." "Believe that as." They walked toward the car. The crowd's cheers echoed behind them, but Snoop's mind was already elsewhere. On the fight ahead, on the truth that needed telling. The nightmare might have ended, but the battle was just beginning. The world needed to know, and he was ready to make sure it did. Kevin's jaw tightened, his knuckles turning white as his fists clenched at his sides. "You serious right now? This ain't just bad, man. This is straight up criminal. We gotta act, and we gotta act fast. I'm already on it," Snoop replied, his voice low and firm. "Get the legal team lined up. I'm going public with this." The car ride back was heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional buzz of Kevin's phone as he coordinated with lawyers, PR reps, and media contacts. Snoop sat by the window, eyes fixed on the blurred lights of the city, his mind replaying every moment from the flight. The cold glares, the sharp words, the rough hands, shoving him like he was less than human. The humiliation burned deep, but beneath it was something stronger, resolve. As soon as they reached the house, Snoop headed straight to his office. Kevin set up the camera without a word, and within minutes, Snoop was live. The notification hit his millions of followers like a spark to dry grass. The chat exploded instantly, messages of confusion, concern, and support scrolling faster than the eye could track. Snoop leaned into the mic, taking a slow, steadying breath. "What's good, y'all? It's your boy, Snoop. I know y'all been wondering where I've been these past few days, and honestly, this ain't a story I ever thought I'd have to tell. But y'all need to hear this." He laid it all out. The hostility from the captain, the confrontation that turned violent, the abandonment in the middle of nowhere, and the villagers who had shown him compassion when others had denied him dignity. His voice never cracked, but the weight of it pressed through the screen. The chat swelled with outrage, angry emojis, messages of disbelief, and the hashtag justice for Snoop appearing again and again like a war cry. Snoop shifted forward, locking eyes with the lens. "That man thought he could get away with this 'cause of how I look. Nah, not today. We're gonna fight back for me, for anybody who's ever been disrespected. Like that, you'll with me." The internet answered loud and clear. The video went viral within hours, splashed across every platform. Celebrities, activists, and everyday people raised their voices, demanding answers. News anchors spoke with carefully measured outrage, and justice for Snoop climbed to the top of trending lists, turning a single act of discrimination into a national reckoning behind the scenes. Kevin moved with relentless focus, pulling together a powerhouse legal team. Within 48 hours, they filed a lawsuit against the pilot, and the airline headlines blared across screens from coast to coast. One broadcaster, eyes solemn, declared, "This isn't just about Snoop Dogg. This is about confronting systemic racism in our skies." As days passed, the airlines scrambled to contain the firestorm. Statements of regret were issued, promises of internal reviews made, but the public wasn't buying it. They wanted more than apologies, they wanted accountability. Snoop understood the weight of the moment. This was bigger than him. It was about standing up to a system that had for too long looked the other way. As he prepared for the legal battle ahead, he carried with him the hopes of millions who had said in one voice, "Enough." The day of the trial, the courthouse was a hive of tension. The steps were lined with cameras. Reporters jostled for position as Snoop stepped out of a sleek black SUV flanked by his legal team. His face was calm, his posture unyielding. Inside the courtroom hummed with quiet anticipation. Captain Richard Wallace sat rigid at the defendant's table, his jaw-clenched eyes flicking anxiously to the gallery behind him. His lawyers spoke in hushed tones, casting weary glances at the crowd of activists and journalists who filled every seat. Snoop's legal team radiated quiet confidence. Leading them was a sharp-witted civil rights attorney, her presence commanding and unwavering. As she rose to deliver her opening statement, the room seemed to hold its breath. "This case," she began, voice clear and deliberate, "is not about safety. It's about prejudice. It's about a man who was singled out, humiliated and abandoned because of the color of his skin. And today we say, no more." The case was a stark testament to the corrosive power of prejudice, a story of a man who wielded his authority not to ensure safety, but to degrade and endanger another human being based solely on the color of his skin. The prosecution laid out a compelling narrative backed by irrefutable evidence and eyewitness testimonies that painted a disturbing picture of that fateful day. Several passengers came forward, each recounting the captain's belligerent demeanor, his condescending tone, and his obstinate refusal to consider reason. One witness, a middle-aged businessman in a crisp navy suit, described how the captain had zeroed in on Snoop Dogg before anyone else. He didn't even talk to the man first. The witness said, voice tinged with disbelief, "You could see it, he'd already made up his mind about Mr. Broadus the moment he stepped on that plane." The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted when the flight attendants took the stand. Their initial hesitation was palpable, but as the questioning progressed, the weight of suppressed guilt cracked through one attendant. Her hands trembling described the moment the captain pushed Snoop toward the exit. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I knew it was wrong, but he was the captain. I was scared." The truth, raw and undeniable, cast a heavy silence over the room as the trial wore on. The defense floundered, resorting to personal attacks in a desperate bid to discredit Snoop. They dredged up past controversies, attempting to portray him as someone unworthy of sympathy. The move backfired spectacularly. Snoop's lawyer, a composed woman with steel in her eyes, countered effortlessly, "Mr. Broadus," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom tension, "is not the one on trial here. This case is about unchecked authority, about the insidious racism that allowed a man to be judged not by his actions, but by his skin." The turning point came when the prosecution played the airport security footage. The grainy video showed it all, the captain tossing Snoop's belongings onto the sun-baked tarmac, shoving him toward an isolated area and walking away. Without a backward glance, the jury sat motionless, faces etched with disbelief. The images spoke louder than any testimony could. Closing arguments sealed the outcome. Snoop's lawyer stood, her voice unwavering as she delivered the final words. "This case is not just about one man's suffering," she said. "It's about ensuring that no one, regardless of race, status, or background, endures the humiliation and danger Mr. Broadus faced. It's about accountability, about justice." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours when the verdict was read, guilty on multiple counts, including assault and reckless endangerment. The courtroom erupted in applause. The judge's sentence was swift and decisive. Permanent revocation of the captain's license and a lengthy prison term outside the courthouse steps became a stage for a community united. Reporters pushed forward, microphones extended, cameras rolling. Snoop stepped up, raised a hand for quiet, and spoke with calm resolve. "This ain't just about me," he said. "This is about all of us. Justice has been served, but we're not done. We're going to keep fighting until everyone gets the respect they deserve it." The moment resonated far beyond the courthouse walls. The clip went viral, turning Snoop Dogg into more than a music icon. He became a symbol of perseverance, and Justice Airlines across the country announced plans to revisit. Their diversity training news anchors spoke of a reckoning in the skies later. That night, high above the earth, Snoop reclined in the plush leather seat of a private jet. The hum of the engines was a comforting backdrop as he gazed out at the endless stretch of midnight sky. A glass of champagne rested in his hand, its surface glinting under the soft cabin lights around him. His legal team and close friends, including Kevin, toasted the hard-won victory. The fight had taken its toll, draining, exhausting, relentless, but the outcome made it worthwhile. The airline's public apology had come with a pledge to reform to ensure no passenger would again suffer such indignity. The captain sat behind bars, a stark warning of what happens when prejudice is left unchecked. Justice, long overdue, had finally been served. The jet flew on, cutting through the sky with effortless grace. For the first time in weeks, Snoop allowed himself to exhale, to feel the weight lift, if only slightly. The battle wasn't over, he knew. That the road ahead was long, and the work far from complete. But tonight, justice had won, and that was a victory worth savoring. The private jet cruised smoothly at 35,000 FT, its cabin filled with an air of quiet celebration. Snoop Dogg leaned back in, his seat a glass of champagne in hand, gazing out at the vast expanse of blue sky. This time, there was no tension, no hostility, only peace and the satisfaction of victory. The events of the past weeks had been a whirlwind. The trial, the media frenzy, the overwhelming public support. The fight had been draining, but it was worth it. The mood on the jet was celebratory, yet grounded, a quiet acknowledgement that this triumph was merely one chapter in a larger story to the real ones. Snoop said, lifting his glass with a knowing smile, "Y'all held me down through everything. I couldn't have done it without you." Kevin chuckled, shaking his head. "Nah, man, this was all you. We just made sure folks were paying attention." The group laughed, their glasses clinking. In unison beneath the playful banter lay a shared understanding of the gravity of their victory. They'd weathered the storm together, and now they were here soaring above the clouds with the weight of the past week finally lifting as the plane began its descent. The cabin door opened and the pilot appeared, an elegant black woman with a calm, commanding presence. She extended her hand with a warm smile. "Mr. Broadies, it's a privilege to have you on board." "Appreciate you," Captain Snoop said as he clasped her hand. "You all already went above and beyond. We're about 30 minutes out from the Maldives. Let me know if there's anything we can do to make the rest of the flight more comfortable." Snoop gave a nod of gratitude, then turned to the window. The first glimpse of the Maldives came into view, an endless stretch of turquoise water shimmering beneath the sun like liquid sapphire. He couldn't help but smile. This was the moment he'd imagined, one born from adversity, now transformed into a testament of resilience. The jet touched down with a gentle ease as Snoop stepped onto the tarmac. The tropical breeze embraced him like an old friend. Resort staff awaited him with flower garlands and warm, genuine smiles. There were no cameras, no crowds, just the serenity of the island. Exactly as he had hoped, he slid into the golf cart, taking in the scenery as it whisked him toward the villa. The events of the past week replayed in his mind. The public humiliation, the courtroom battle, the unwavering support from his community. It had tested him in ways he never expected, but it had also revealed a strength he hadn't fully realized until now. The cart stopped in front of the villa, a sprawling beachfront retreat with a private pool and an uninterrupted view of the ocean. Snoop stepped inside, dropping his bags by the door. The silence was different here. It wasn't the absence of noise, but the presence of peace. He walked out to the patio, the horizon stretching endlessly ahead, and pulled out his phone. "What's up, y'all?" he said, recording a short video. His voice was steady, filled with quiet pride. "Just touched down in paradise. Gotta say, it feels damn good to be here. But what feels even better, knowing we made a real impact. Shout out to everybody who stood with me. This ain't just my win, it's ours. Stay strong, stay real, and keep pushing for what's right." He uploaded the video, then slid the phone back into his pocket. The crash of the waves provided a steady grounding rhythm, syncing with the beat of his heart. The battle was over, but the ripple effects of their victory would linger long after the headlines faded. For now, though, he allowed himself to breathe, to be present in the simplicity of this moment. Kicking off his shoes, Snoop stepped into the sand. Each step felt like shedding another layer of the past week's weight. The ocean beckoned him forward, its endless horizon promising renewal. The future stretched before him, vast and bright, and Snoop was ready for whatever came next.